Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very unique and special episode of The Founder Files. We're well into season 4 right now, where we've been focusing on the growth and scaling journeys of some of South Africa's ultimate entrepreneurial success stories. The amount of value that our guests have shared on this podcast with their candid stories has honestly been insane. But I also appreciate that 2-hour-long episodes is a lot of content for anyone to consume. So, today, we've cherry-picked some of our favorite scaling lessons and insights from the season so far, so you don't have to. And this is what we have in store for you today. We start off with Melvyn Lubega and how he built out the sales team and sales function that helped grow Go1 into the $2 billion unicorn it is today. We obviously have to hear from the e-commerce kings, Luke Jadakin and Claude on the lessons they learned whilst building Superbalist to a 1 billion rand in revenue per year business. And of course, if we're talking about growth, we need to talk about geographical expansion. So we get the honest story from Jon and Elan Band on how they went through the pains of learning to manage multiple locations when they first expanded motion ads across South Africa. We then go international with Payments24 as Shadab Rahil and Nolan Daniel acquired their first customers in each new country they expanded to. And finally, because growth isn't just about revenue, we hear from Paul Cook about how they improved efficiencies across Silvertree's brands companies to grow profit. Now, if you aren't already following the Founder Files on social media or on your preferred podcast platform, and this episode doesn't convince you to do that, then I don't know what will. So strap in and enjoy this very special bonus episode on growth. Welcome to the Founder Files, the podcast that's like eavesdropping on a conversation with a successful entrepreneur over a fireside chat. Join me, Cameron Coots, through this unique experience of unfiltered stories and insights from scaling founders around the globe as they share their ups, downs, and everything in between. Cool. So you've explained the 0 to 1 journey. There's obviously one would call it a pivot. I think it's just an evolution that you really went to, because it's not necessarily I don't know how one pivots from a single stakeholder business model into a multi-stakeholder business model. That's definitely an evolution more than it is a pivot. But you went through that process. You say the 0 to 1 journey is now over. From there, now what's the growth strategy? How are you going to grow the business from here?
World domination. So it's interesting, right? So at that point in time, we were still very much inside sales. And so inside sales is more like outbound sales. So we had like a very well-structured, call it sales organization, which I used to look after, where we had like, you had your account, you had your SDRs, your sales development representatives, doing the cold outreach, the prospecting, and they go sub demos, and they had some demo targets. Then you had account executive coming in from, let's say, demo to close. It was a very well-oiled machine. You had cadences, you had emails you followed up on, we had scripts, we had templates, and that did very, very well. I mean, for 2 years when you're growing, on average of whatever 25% month on month. I mean, you know that the system is working fairly well, and so it's something which we were able to tweak out and adjust and really get to the juice of that. And so that skill journey helped us definitely there. But I also at some point, we also realized that hey, the same way like when you went to content, no one buys a bookshelf without wanting to have books or having books like content to an LMS. We also realized that hey, many companies had already invested in, because now we're selling books, and at some point we're selling the books and call it the bookshelves. Whereas actually many companies already had an investment in a bookshelf but didn't like the books they had. And so the key thing was then asking the question, what is it that we do better than anybody else, not only in product but also in operations? And so it's thinking about shared value and collaboration. And so the same way when we were when we began in our content journey, typically the typical competitors guys who compare us to actually today are probably all our partners. Someone say, oh no, is Harvard Management or their online learning subscription compared to yours? No, they're a partner. Is Pluralsight a competitor with their online learning? No, they're actually a partner of ours. And so over time you realize, because we're an aggregator, like any good nursing school report, we play well with others. And so the same thing was then true thinking about our platform. And that's when we do see the value of partnerships for distribution. And so if you think about the evolution of the business today, the big thing is, how do we partner with others to get to market? And so we have actually less of a focus now on outbound sales ourselves, but rather for the last couple of years, we've actually grown our partner business. Because think about it, if you are a big HR platform or LMS 360, Docebo, Facebook Workplace, or SAP SuccessFactors, whatever it is, you've already captured the audience of the HR managers. You're already in the company, and we're able, with our content library, to help you get more engagement, more stickiness, and obviously grow your average revenue with your client. And so, and also you have a lower CAC or cost of acquiring the customer than we would, because you're already there in the organization. So it costs us less, opposed to trying to call, build trust with the person and then say, let's come in. And so realizing that and saying, look, how can we enable certain types of organizations who we think are the ideal partners to capture and create more value for their customers? And so now we've built an organization where we're able to enable customers to sell our product into their current client base and organizations. And so that was really a big part of our scale journey. Obviously, there's a scale on the product side, thinking through, when you think about adding content to your platform. So content is product.
Hold on, Melvyn, sorry. I actually do want to pause you now, because I've already listed 3 things that I want to deep dive into, and now we're going to get into so many. So
let's go.
I'm going to pause you quickly. I'm going to take you 3 steps back to talking about the sales development representatives. I think, and first and foremost, you've done so much work yourself on B2B sales, right? And I know that a lot of people listening to this are in the B2B space as well. So I just really want to let's focus and double click on that, because you've how did you really build that out? Seems like that first strategy was very much investing into our sales process, our sales playbook, making sure that we've got the sales capability, the people there. Even what you passed on there is the key metric for success is not necessarily deals closed, it's not demos delivered, because that's all we can really control, right? The next thing's going to happen from there. So I just want to go deep dive into that journey now of you firstly realizing what it is that you knew about B2B sales, and that's the nature of no one in the business can sell better than the founder, and that's how it should be. At least 0 to 1 and steps after that.
Yes.
After that, I don't know. You ideally want people better than you in everything. So talk to me just about that journey, and that your journey in terms of taking you with a core capability for that, as you mentioned from the founding story. How did you build that into the business? And what was, you would say, the process to the point where, cool, that capability is fine. Let's focus somewhere else.
Yeah, and it's such an interesting point. I'm a believer that, especially in the 0 to 1 journey, you shouldn't hire for a role you haven't tried yourself, which is a hard task to do. It's easier on sales. If you're not a technical founder, you'll struggle. But for me, it was if you don't know the pain. So even when I was heading up sales and we had whatever 70 guys in our revenue org, whatever it was at the time, before we started to do more partnerships and stuff, was I used to make sure even once a week I still cold call or try cold call a customer, just so you get a sense of the cold face of what's happening, because otherwise you can quickly divorce yourself. Because one thing sales guys can do is sell, and one thing you can do better than sell is sell themselves. And so from that perspective, in an interview, you will leave there being okay, fine, I want to hire 10 sales guys, that's going to be my revenue, that time is a quota, but when they get there, boom, will be a unicorn. And it never works out that way. And by the time you realize the guy's not working out, or the goal's not working out, you spend 6 months of salary and you've burnt your runway, and there's so many things with that. And so for me, it's almost if you understand the buying process and actually break it down from experience, you deeply understand. And also in the same vein, to your point, no one can articulate that passion like the founder can. Obviously, you can pepper it in a big contract. The founder comes out hey, you're important to us. Let's go when you get to scale. Or you create the full sense of, hi, this is Melvin's assistant. Okay, hi, it's Melvyn. But either way, it's just thinking through, that sales funnel. I think for us very early on, it was one, losing our experiences. And so for me personally, so when I was looking for my first role, when I was in final year at UCT Actual Science, I'd spent more than half the year outside the country. I was running a program in Washington, D.C. for internship and young leaders. I remember coming back 2 weeks to finals and not having a job offer. And I was okay, cool. I'm how do I do that? And so obviously all my friends had the job offers, many of them on bursaries. I was on scholarships. I didn't have an exact path to go to. And I said look, I literally reached out to the CEOs of all the big companies I wanted to work with. And so, thinking through the basics, and something which worked well for me was hey, look, my logic was if I reached out to the CEO, got their attention, they would obviously fob me off to HR. But by the time HR got the list from the CEO to be like,
yeah, it's coming from the
look,
CEO.
hey,
It's
Melvyn,
not coming from the
exactly. Literally, and so like
acquisition pipeline,
I mean, like literally, and you figure out the image. It's like, is it whatever, S.Kosef, is it Stephen.Kosef at Investec? Is it back then, Bum at Deloitte or Lwazi.Bum at Deloitte, whatever it was, all the companies I was trying to target. And you just figure out the email addresses and you say, like, look, the most clickbait heading ever around partnership and world domination. So they click on the email. And I remember that email was ridiculous. Probably had like half my CV in there saying like, hey, young South Africa, would love to do whatever with you. This is who I am. And yeah, someone replied, be like, hey, Melvyn, I don't know, I got my email address, but hey, hey, Cynthia, Carol, please meet Melvyn. And then you get someone replying like, oh, sorry, Mr. Lubega, for the late response. We'd love to chat to you. And what I replicate that in my journey for sales.
And for the record, you've already applied to that job. Like, you've already applied to the job, and like you've got the formal application in there, and you're going CEO route, and then it's like, oh yeah, sorry, we were getting to your application. Don't worry.
and so the key thing there, the insight for me was, how do you leverage the social equity and respect of peers? And so, for example, I always know the ultimate buyer is going to be someone in the HR L&D function. But I'll probably go via the COO or the CFO or someone to be like, hey, I don't know if you're the right person, but this is what we do. Could you get me to the right person? If you're not the right person, they'll be like, look, I'm not the person that deals with learning, but here's my colleague. And so by them doing that, the person will be like, oh, HR, okay, cool. Well, Samantha said I should check this out. I'll check it out. And so being able to, so I would, in my SDR world, I would never really target my first email on my exact target. I would always have my cadence to be like, hey, who are the peers of the person we're targeting, and get the introduction from them. Because if you're an L&D manager, everyone's going to ping you around some L&D tool. Same if you're a CFO, everyone pings about ERPs. But if you ping a CFO about an L&D tool, it's like, yo, not my space. Speak to XYZ. And so it was interesting being able to leverage different tactics and A/B test what makes the most sense. And so that's why I look, by the end, our like cold call script or like our email campaign or the subject heading and this, that was down to a T that is unrivaled. Because we're able to think through those implications and work on the reaction, where's clicked on, where's not clicked on, who clicks through, who doesn't click through, what works. And so very much data-driven at the outset around thinking through that funnel from that perspective.
That's so fascinating because, if I'm just thinking about myself as a founder, I mean, small team of 5 people, right? But now if I'm going to be, and we're receiving emails all the time from mostly B2B service-based businesses. That's exactly why I don't ever really want to get into email outreach myself for that sense, specifically about what we do. Could be a flawed thinking, but we'll get into that separately. But the point there is that instead of coming directly from the provider and saying like a account executive there, or salesperson, or even someone like relatively high up within the company, if someone in my team was like, Cam, is this something that you'd be interested in? Instantly, I'm giving it the time of day and the consideration. Versus looking at the email and barely even opening it, I'm not interested. I don't need this, right? Versus receiving it from someone in my team would be like, well, let me think about it and see if I do need it. And that's so subtle, but so clever because it's making everyone's life a bit easier. I mean, look, you might have slightly inconvenienced the ops person or CFO or whoever it might be. It's like, okay, passing it on, but then they forget about it instantly, and then like that's immediately get attention. I think that's such a golden nugget, and so subtle, but really effective.
So to your point, I don't think it's often an inconvenience for the person who refers you on, because if they believe that by referring you on, they're adding value to their colleague, they will do so willingly. And so, Dropbox's double-sided referral is well known, where, they were able to say, like, look, you, by referring someone, get space, and you give the person you're referring some space as well over and above their current quota. And so it's almost a sense of like, hey, I'm gifting you something. Even though I'm benefiting, I'm gifting you. Try this thing out called Dropbox.
I'm helping you.
And so I'm able to say, hey, exactly. I'm able to say, hey, like, look, we have worked with companies similar to your spouse and helped them achieve these kind of outcomes. And we think the same would be true for you. I don't know if you're the right person, but if you aren't happy to come to the right person, it's almost like saying, hey, person, you're the experts in your field. I'm recognizing that you're my colleague. This could be valuable to you. And you're then also adding value to their lives.
This is the segue into the geographical expansion, right? In Joburg, Pretoria, right? And one could essentially call them one megalopolis, if you will. So it's a similar spot. You're now in probably 2 different cities and regions. So talk to me now. It's like you've got this long-term contract, so you can really start focusing on getting more bikes on the road. you've got some cash flow security that comes from some form of predictability of a campaign with enough of a size and scale in more than one city. How did things start kind of growing from there, and how are you now managing 2 different locations?
Yeah, I think the important thing to realize, this is not all sunshine and rainbows at this point either. Like, there's still huge insecurity that we're feeling in this business. And like this, Founder Files is a place to be vulnerable and to share real stories. Like, it's so easy to say, oh, cool, we're in Cape Town and now we're flying down and we're setting things up. And, you tell your mates and they're like, sick, well done. Like, you guys are in Cape Town now. But this is still hand to mouth stuff. This is month by month. We're still having to do everything in the business. It's still me and Elan who are fulfilling all 8 functions and more of the business. And
so it's still just the 2 of you, eh? You didn't have any permanent employees yet.
So we had in Joburg a city manager. That city manager is now, underneath me and Elan, and they're managing the city. So fundamentally, a lot of the driver, interactions, engagements. We run these inspections every month. Operationally, it's a very difficult business to run. There's so many moving parts, and the bikes always have to look good because that's what clients and brands are paying for. So to ensure that the bike's always looking good, to ensure the drivers are always happy, to ensure the product's always great, and to manage the life cycle of a campaign in general, there's a lot of moving parts. And so Elan and I were doing that for so long. Elan and I were the guys wrapping the bikes. We were the guys driving to collect stock. We were doing everything. Elan mentioned earlier, we had some student help. So as we were growing, we started to have one particular student who would come into the business and help us on these days of inspections, or what we call flighting. So flighting of a new campaign, the start of a new campaign. We then have a city manager in Johannesburg, who, again, we bootstrapping. So the sort of that level that we were able to hire was very entry level. So Elan and I are fundamentally doing most of the work, and still a lot of the manual work too. We were at every inspection. We were doing all of that stuff. And we start going to Cape Town. And again, just to come back to this insecurity, we know that we've got a product, or product market fit. We know that we're in here on something. We've got clients. We know that we can do this. It's legal, it's ethical, everything's fine. But we're still.
And we also start noticing that the model in Johannesburg is almost like a cookie cut model to a Cape Town. We when we go to Cape Town, and just to talk about that ethics side, Cam, when we go to Cape Town and start like understanding the market there, was first, okay, do we have supply? And then we started realizing, well, it's very similar to Johannesburg. It's the whole execution is the same. We started realizing that the model is the exact same. The market is the exact same. And we then start looking at hiring a student in Cape Town, exactly what we did in Johannesburg. So now we've got the city man in Johannesburg. Well, okay, if the model is the exact same, the market's the same, well, we need a city manager in Cape Town. And, we kind of have applied that way of thinking from Johannesburg, and then applying that to the different cities across South Africa. Just to kind of talk a bit about it's not just Jon and I. We did apply like city managers underneath us in Johannesburg, and then in Cape Town.
I definitely want to get into the product in a bit more depth, but I want to focus now on this geographical expansion and the fact that you were in Latin America, that you're now trying to target Germany and realizing that didn't necessarily work, focusing on emerging markets. I mean, all of this is like, through hindsight, we're able to create the simplicity, but I can imagine the process of it, there's a lot of figuring it out, right? So, but talk to me about how you were able to, gain that first customer in countries where you actually had no presence and paid for no right to be able to get a customer in there. So you spoke about Panama, right, of all places. How did you manage to get your first customer there in the first place from Cape Town during COVID?
So a lot of these regions open up, fortunately for us, via RFP tender kind of process where customers are coming to us, or consulting companies like Accenture and EY, all these specialist companies that are hired by these enterprise customers to go out, look for solutions for them to solve their problems. So it more comes inwards, us rather than going out and doing cold call sales and trying to open up market. Majority of it has been other way around, where globally, because again we build a product for global market, we positioned it accordingly. So there is a lot of incoming rather than outgoing targeting that we are doing. So that's how Panama happened. That's how entire Latin America happened. Southeast Asia, hopefully happening, and so on. So it's more incoming than outgoing, but creating that awareness that you are in the market is important, right? Nobody in Philippines will know that you Payment24 exists, right? But now they do, right? Nobody in Panama would have known that we exist. So it is again a journey. There's no magic trick. There's no silver bullet for this. You have to build that credibility, right, by having these multinational customers, and that was, I think, quite an important factor. Having multinational customers, where somebody sitting in the other corner of the world will recognize that logo. Hey, this is one of our competitors using this product. Uh, Maybe let me have a look. Maybe they can solve the problem for me as well. That happens quite often, right? So it is incoming, Cameron. It's not so much outgoing that we go and target this country. We are at that stage now. We have plenty of incoming regions, new regions, which is keeping us busy. Although we are still purposefully targeting some developed markets, but it's going to be a long journey, longer than just the incoming journey where customers are approaching us from different regions of the world, different parts of the world. Going out to a particular new region, it's a lot more complex on your own. It will take a lot more time and a lot more investment. So we prefer the other way around. It's a little bit easier, but and seems to be working quite well.
But I just wanted to just latch on to that. Is we also do go to industry events, right, where it's very focused. Because like Shadab said, the companies need to know about you so that when they go out on RFP in 1 or 2 or 5 years, they know about Payment24. So at least you need to create that awareness so that you are in their consideration set when they go out on RFP or tender. Because also the way our business runs and our customers, how they run their projects, it's not something that comes out every year. It might be a 5-year solution on the low end almost, I would think. So it's not something that comes along every year. And when they go out, you really want to be there. And once we get to that first step, then obviously then we can open the kimono and show them what we have. But if they don't know about it, it's not going to help.
100%. So I really want to get deeper in this. How did you make sure that you were findable? Because the couple of things that I'm thinking about there is the industry events obviously makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I'm thinking about now is you mentioned the consultancies of the world, and what they're going to be doing is they'll usually look at how are similar companies or competitors doing this in other like similar kinds of markets. What have they been done? They'll do some research, but even then you still need to be findable, right? It's not just a straightforward thing of like, okay, look at this company, what products are they using? Like there's some kind of research that they need to do. So how did you make yourself findable to the consultants that they can dig a little bit deeper? And how did you make yourself findable to the customers? And other points I've got in here is like, was the search engine optimization? You mentioned industry events. So I wonder, how did you make yourself findable?
So in a nutshell, like I mentioned earlier, Cameron, that Nolan and I are not marketing or salespeople, and we really don't have that skill set within the organization. So the answer will be disappointing, I would say. We did not have a great strategy on that front from a marketing and sales perspective because we don't have the expertise, right? We are entrepreneurs, so we figure things out. as you go along. And that's what we did. We figured things out, right? Okay, let's look at the industry events. What our competitors are doing, right? Where are they, right? Advertising, or which industry events they're entering, but again, what publications they are advertising into, right? How are they marketing? So we tried to obviously learn from these giants of the industry which we were trying to replace. That was one thing we consciously did, right? But at the same time, I think that bigger trick was in the product itself and our product strategy. Because we built something for the niche market, right? Meaning oil and gas payment systems for fleets, for example. It's very niche. There are not 100 players for it out there. There are limited number of players that can do this because it's very expert area. Same with fuel loyalty or loyalty generally and payment systems for fuel and retail, right? It's niche. They are not like hundreds of companies out there doing this. Like if you look for a billing system, you will find a whole list Google full of it, right? But if you look for a fleet payments platform, it's a bit less competition from that perspective. That has helped us naturally, right? Making sure we built a good enough product with a decent enough customer reference, which is multinational. And to get to that part, it takes time. But once you have that, then it's, from there, it takes momentum. But to get get that far, it does take time. But again, it does help that you look at your competitors, right? What they are doing, because you're not competing with somebody where you can just SEO, right? Your website and certain things, and people will buy. These solutions are not bought by clicking on a link and downloading a software and you have a customer. Unfortunately, I hope it was that easy. It's not. The only thing you can hope for is get an inquiry via website, right? And maybe that leads into something. Okay, and it does work. But it is. I would say, I don't know, Nolan, if you want to add to it, but I think looking at your competitors, learning from them, they've been doing it for years, marketing and sales, right? And if it's not your forte, it's not ours. We try to learn from them. There's no harm in learning from competitors. They're also clever people.
Yeah, I agree on the nicheness of the product, right? It's our industry. It's not really a sexy industry, right? We're not Stripe or any of those cool companies. But when customers are looking for a solution, they typically know at least what they are looking for. And that's why we would often pop up in Google search results, etc. But to be honest, for a very long time, we didn't even have all our products on our website. Specifically because we didn't want our competitors to know what we were up to. We were still like a lot smaller, and we preferred to fly under the radar for quite some time. We did, some of very large companies did actually copy some of our products and features that we have, but that's okay now. We're a bit bigger, we can absorb it. We don't forgive them. We're not going to forget, but regardless, that's just how it is, right? Especially in technology, it's simple to copy something. Just depends how good your copy is as well. But yeah, niche. So I think even those companies like Shadab mentioned, the consulting houses, I mean, they often didn't know anything. And I think very often we had to educate them on the industry, on the market, what their customers would actually want. And I think that's where particularly Shadab is very strong in educating prospective customers on where they should be going. And again, that builds that trust and partnership relationship that they then come back to say, because this is someone that we can work with for the long term.
Now you're at the point where you're taking Superbalist ready to the races and you're growing significantly. So tell me about this journey around how you got to R1 billion in turnover with the company. And what would you say are like some of the main, maybe one person can ask is like, what are like the main things that really facilitated that growth or catalyzed that growth, or a better word. And then the other person can maybe say, like, well, these are all the mistakes along the way that we learned and had to figure out and pay the school fees for.
Cool. I mean, maybe I'll talk to growth. So first of all, it was asked of us. And I think if you look at the size of Takealot, and Takealot had its primary investor for the beginning was Tiger, a New York-based hedge fund in Facebook, Flipkart, massive businesses. And so for them, they're not interested in a business doing 1 million rand or 10 million rand. Like, the materiality matters. And they eventually sold to Naspers, and the same is true for them. So we were encouraged from the outset to think much, much, much bigger. So I mentioned when we produced our first budget, I couldn't tell you what it said or what our predictions were, but almost certainly Kim would have looked at it and said, it's nowhere near bold enough or big enough. Go bigger. So if we thought, 30% growth was big or 40% growth was big, he would say things like, come back and show me what 80 is going to cost. Which was amazing, because we were challenged to kind of think about what was possible, albeit in a very, very quantitative way. So if I want you to double the business this year, yeah,
like that was the flavor of 2015 to 2020 market share. So I guess,
very true.
Just it was a privilege to be able to operate in that environment.
And so we had no idea, is the truth, but we went away and I guess got around a whiteboard and thought about what it would take. And so your question was, what did it take? I think, as I mentioned, the key ones are, you've got to grow traffic at the end of the day. You've got to grow customers coming out of that traffic, actually shopping. And then you've got to ship orders. And when you start with those two in between, it's like, how much inventory do we need to put on the thing in between? And so I at the time got better quickly at marketing and figuring out online marketing. And that's a privilege, because most people in startups don't have a massive war chest. So I'd like, well, if I gave you 100 million in marketing, what would you do with it? But that is kind of where we were at. So then you really, really think about that. And I probably would have, I'm pretty sure I told Kim in the beginning, I think we should do campus activations and influencers. And he definitely laughed me out of the room and was like, no, that's not what we're not what we're doing. Sharpen pencils got better, but fundamentally, I think in the marketing stream, what we realized is that you don't buy revenue, you buy customers, and the customers gives you revenue. So you take the sum of your marketing and you divide it by the number of customers you're getting in your steady state. Like last year, we spent 10 million and we had so many first-time buyers that shopped the site. Okay, cool. So it was, 10 million, bought 10,000 customers. Now we've got a cost per customer. Then you slice that up per channel. So what was the cost from the customer coming from Facebook? What was the cost from the customer coming from email, from Google, and so on? Then you're like, oh, okay, cool. First time I'm looking at this, turns out that customer costs 2x what that customer costs. Okay, now I'm seeing the first pattern. I should invest more in channel A and less in channel B. So then you kind of, at the base case, goes, so if I was to double my revenue, I have to double my customers. And if I was to double my customers, I would start with those channels that are giving me customers at the cheapest cost. But they don't go to the sky. So you can only buy so much Facebook traffic at that customer acquisition cost before you get diminishing returns, because there's so much intent before your media funnel goes too wide. And you play with that and you play with that. And that I could talk through for hours, but that was like a huge change in my thinking, is that you're not buying revenue, you're buying customers. Stop looking at revenue. And then downstream from that is you can grow your customer base two ways. At the
at the head, which is the way I've talked about, acquire customers more efficiently, and at the tail, stop losing them. So retention. So then you do a similar exercise.
And then in the middle, increase basket size.
Correct. We had 1,000 customers. We lost half. Where did they go? Why did we lose them? Oh, it turns out if you cancel customers' orders, you lose N%. If you don't answer the phone, you lose N%. If you don't put in the box what they thought, you lose N%. So you start going, maybe stop doing that. So that's where the operational rigor comes through, is that good ops ultimately drives retention and fixes churn, which improves your CAC, which allows you to scale. And I think if you look at Takealot, it's a fairly vanilla marketer. If you look at how it's positioned in the market, it's not an award-winning marketer, but it's a 15 out of 10 operational business. And over time, I would have said Kalahari was a more interesting brand. Probably had funnier ads. Kalahari was probably more loved on a qualitative basis, but incomparable operational metrics. And that allowed the 5-year-old Takealot business to eclipse the 15-year-old Kalahari business. And so we learned from that, I guess, on the growth trajectory. Ops buys growth. Maybe I'll pause there because it's covered a bit of ops and it's covered a bit of customer growth. Claude can talk to where we screwed it up, which is all over the shop.
Please do.
Yeah. I mean, my answer is, I don't know, it's maybe a little bit boring, but I do not look back and think of like a handful of things that I regret, or I'm like, I wish we had been more data-led, or I wish we hadn't hired that person, or I wish we hadn't signed that brand, or I wish we had tried harder. There's really none of that. I think to Luke's point before he handed it over was like, we just kind of screwed it up all over the shop day to day, like struggles. But
like any good entrepreneur,
we gave it our all, and like it turned out pretty good. And I don't know, there was no like calamity, thank goodness. But that's not to say we got it perfect. So yeah, I guess it's the daily grind. It was, in hindsight, super tiring, like exhausting on a personal, emotional level. Like we didn't leave anything out there. And maybe that's why I have that answer. And I also have that answer because it ended well. I guess if it didn't end well, we would have probably pointed out what the turning point downwards was. It probably becomes a bit more easy in that case.
I think one thing that we actually haven't spoken about once, right, is just growth, right? And like that's like a huge thing that when we've alluded to it, we've said some of the things that like are necessary for growth, etc. But we haven't gotten into the how parts of growth and how these founders have grown. So obviously a big part of joining a group and the capabilities that you're able to bring and the way that you're able to scale the business is a huge lure in terms of bringing the companies in. But now these companies are there. How have you managed to grow these companies? And it's obviously there's the e-commerce point that's similar, and there's the skills and knowledge and industry experience can do that, but they're also still fundamentally different businesses with different markets and different customers at the end of the day. So how have, within this group, how do you ensure first and foremost that this is the right group to grow within? And then secondly, how is it that you manage that growth within a group instead of just as a solo company?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also personal growth, by the way. And I'll just, as an aside on that, there's also a topic around if you're a founder transitioning to a CEO, you need to think very carefully around how you're ensuring that you yourself are growing as well, because your role is changing. Anyway, let's talk about, and again, somewhat off point. But I mean, I think on this topic around growth, so I would kind of think about it in two buckets. The one is, how do you grow revenue? And the second one is, how do you improve efficiency? And that second one is actually something that we've been thinking about a lot at Silvertree over the last 2 years. Because I spoke a long time ago about this period of time where, as a startup, you maybe stop having momentum. So your growth slows down for whatever reason. And that then changes the company culture significantly and changes what you need to do. So there's obviously the topic around how you maintain revenue growth, and maybe let's come back to that. But what do you do when revenue slows down? And this is generally going to happen in most businesses at some stage, right? In our particular case, it was post-COVID. So COVID came along. All of our businesses could continue to operate because they were essential services, and they were obviously online. And so we had a cracker of a 2020 from a commercial point of view, although it was very difficult personally and to actually keep operating. And up until that stage, e-commerce had only ever grown as a share of revenue in the world. Like, e-commerce had only ever gone up. And so from that was this idea that all that it needs is for people to try e-commerce, and then they're going to stay as e-commerce customers. And so the entire e-commerce industry in the whole world were rubbing their hands to say, fantastic, we've had this leap forward 5 years into the future. We've acquired 5 years worth of customer growth. Fantastic. And so everybody, including us, hired new warehouses, hired new staff, blah, 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 right? Off we went. And then it turns out that for the first time in history, e-commerce's share of revenue as a share of retail went down. And it is now pretty much in much of the world, on most of the kind of categories that did exist pre-COVID, roughly where it would have been had COVID not happened. So COVID was an up, and then it was a down, and then it's back to trend. And so we're on this underlying trend as e-commerce as a sort of market saturation in retail, as if COVID had never happened. But of course, we didn't get there through steady growth. We got there from over expansion and then having to cut costs. And so we needed to cut costs and focus a lot on efficiency. And that's when a lot of our topics around how we look for synergies across the portfolio companies became more urgent. Because in general, if you're growing fast, you can afford to be a little bit inefficient. Because you can afford it, and also because you can always invest a couple of months ahead of your capacity. So you can have a bit of slack so that as the additional demand comes in, you don't land up running short. All of a sudden, when you go through a downturn period, all of a sudden there's a lot of focus on cash and on cash flow and actual affordability. Plus, you need to start thinking again about, if I can't drive the top line, how do I drive efficiencies further down the stack? And so we then worked a lot over the last few years at how do we cut inefficiency out of what we do. Luckily we're growing steadily again, and so that means that these days our efficiencies do not have to focus on can we cut people, which is an incredibly painful, difficult process, dangerous process. It can instead be, how do we grow our business faster than we grow our cost base? So our cost base can grow 10, 15%, and our revenue can grow 30, 40%, right? And the way that you do that is incredible attention to detail. It's essentially looking at, what do we do that doesn't work well or that takes a lot of time? And then spending a lot of time with a lot of people working out, why do we do it that way? And how can we do it a different way? And in particular, even better, can we just not do it at all? Those are the most difficult and the most impactful things. Yeah. And so one example at Faithful to Nature, for example, which was a very difficult decision to make, but it was absolutely the right one. About 2 years ago, Faithful to Nature, its entire history, it had where you could buy products that we didn't yet have in stock. So you'd buy the product, it was a back order, we'd send you a message to say, we'd warn you before you bought it. So the communication was very good. We'd tell you in advance, look, we don't have it right now. Your order's going to wait until it arrives. And then we'd communicate with you and say, look, this is what the supplier is saying. We should expect it in 7 days' time. We'll send it to you then. Do you want us to send the rest of your order now? And we'll send the other product later. It was a really good customer experience.
So just a lot of customer communication.
A lot of customer communication. And it was a huge amount of effort. And so I did a very detailed analysis to actually see whether we made money off these. And the answer was no, because we spent so much time on negotiating with the supplier and with our customer to get the communication right, that it basically, and then plus additional courier costs, that it ate up all of the profit we made off these products. Plus, at the end of the day, it delivered a bad experience to the customer, even though the customer said they were willing to wait. So they didn't think that we were doing anything wrong. They were willing to wait, but nonetheless, they were waiting. So what it was doing was it was reminding customers that Faithful to Nature is something that you buy from if you need the product next week or the week after. Whereas we were competing with you going to the mall and buying your product right now. So we needed to get it right in customers' heads that they expected when you buy it on a faithful nature, I'm going to get it today or tomorrow. Always. Otherwise, you don't trust us and you're going to go to the mall when you run out of something. And so we stopped back orders. And that obviously cost us several % of revenue overnight. But it has meant that we have removed several departments, essentially, from the team over time.
So just to confirm, did you say 70% of revenue?
No.
7?
A few % of revenue. I don't remember the exact number.
A few percent,
not 70%.
Okay. I misheard you quickly. I was like, whoa.
No,
that is a hectic decision.
That would have been a very big decision. No, it was a few %. But still, when we were in a period of time when our revenue was not growing very rapidly, a few % is significant. But it was absolutely the right call, and our organization is way simpler, and our customer experience is way better. And so, so anyway, putting it back to the overall question is that as you grow, you need to be growing your company capabilities and your team capabilities and your team efficiencies such that your costs are growing slower than your revenue is growing. Otherwise, you don't ever get to profitability. And even if you're at profitability, you don't get to better profitability. And so that is a big piece of it and a huge focus of my time on an ongoing basis. And that applies across everything. On the revenue growth side, I mean, like my takeaway is also there. A lot of it is attention to detail. It's just thinking about every single customer interaction that you can think of, prioritizing them by how often they happen, and improving them, and just continuing to do that. Listen, making sure that you're collecting customer feedback systematically, and so and improving it. And that applies across your marketing campaigns, your use of partnerships and of influencers and all these sorts of things, but also your word of mouth, obviously, as well.
Yeah. So a philosophy that we have in Metavolve just about the growth elements there is, again, I love the way that you explain that, because a lot of people are like, okay, how you grow is you grow revenue and you grow profit. And you're like, no, you grow revenue and you improve efficiency, which will lead to profit. Again, leading indicator versus the result. But what we do is that, again, the zoom out of the 15 to 20 year journey that we're busy talking about. I think specifically to our business model, where the time to results in terms of strategy is at least 18 months. So like that kind of thing is naturally, if you look at like the product life cycle of businesses being on average 6 years now, inherently with our business is just longer than that. Haven't calculated the actual number, I just know intuitively it's longer. Anyway, but when we're talking about the growth that we're wanting to achieve, and especially when you're zooming out in marathon level years, it's kind of like, instead of having this constant slope that you're trying to sprint on and like scrabble through, and you trip over and then fall back a bit and just keep going on this, like trying to achieve this linear or exponential growth. I prefer the the analogy of a set of stairs, right? Essentially where the point is like you grow, stabilize, or at sometimes you take 2 steps back to take 3 steps forward. And the point is, and the thing is, and what's incredibly important here is that's not happening in our operational environment, but that's happening at a tactical and a strategic level, where it's sometimes where one of my favorite questions to ask myself is, what's preventing me from focusing 80% of my attention on growth? Right, either in terms of improving efficiencies or increasing revenue. Let's do all of those things right now this quarter, and then let's just create all of the focus to be able to do growth. Because then when we grow to that point, we're going to have new problems that we're going to have to figure out again there and do that. And it's almost this. It's turning into the cycle of there's 3 months of stability, 9 months of growth. 3 months of stability, 9 months of growth. Each year, and so far it's working. I'll let you know if it stays like that for 15 to 20 years.
I really like that. I think that's exactly spot on. And I mean, I think this topic around having the right balance of experimentation versus optimization is also important. It's kind of it's another phrasing exactly what you're saying, is that I've seen some of our businesses which, as a result actually of their company culture that came from the founding team, and even after the founding team had left, they tended to be chaotic businesses. And so they would tend to always be launching something new and not spending time on efficiency. So what that landed up happening is that there were so many workarounds and experiments and these sorts of things that maybe half of team capacity was spent on just keeping the workarounds working. And so that was an example of a business where, in fact, you needed to maybe slow down a little bit on the new product launches and focus a bit more on efficiency so that you could then go back to launching new things more quickly again. But on the other hand, if you have the other extreme to that is to say, whenever we come up with an idea, we're going to do that idea perfectly on day one. We're going to work out all of the operational processes and the KPIs and the reports, etc. But I think there's a part of,
and you fail.
Well, exactly. Launch. You fail to launch, or even more, you launch and it doesn't work, because you didn't test the market, right? And so you've spent a huge amount of resources on it. So I think, often when you're trying a new thing is to be very clear in your mind about why are we doing it at this stage? Are we doing it because we want to make money off it? Or are we doing it because we are wanting to learn? And what you're wanting to learn is you're wanting to learn, can we deliver this thing? And more importantly, do customers want it? And then once you know that customers want it, then you go back and you say, okay, cool. Now we're going to build it properly. And I guess that's a little bit of your point around sort of take a step, stabilize. Taking a step is putting some ideas out there, seeing what sticks. And then when something sticks, then make sure you take the time to actually make it like efficient so that you're not layering like Band-Aid on top of Band-Aid. I think that sort of almost rhythm of new initiative and improvement is a very useful thing to think about.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad we're onto something good. So Paul, like on the topic of growth now, right? We've been speaking about how others do it, how your portfolio companies, Silvertree. That's like we've spoken a lot in the past. We've spoken stories. You've given so much wisdom, so many lessons. I think one of the key things to take out of this and to remember at the end of the day is that the early stage startup experience is very sexy because it's fun and experimenting and figuring things out and doing all that. But a lot of what we've spoken about is like the reality is at the end of the day is you need to be a business. And there's a whole lot of things in business that are extremely engaging and exciting, but not very sexy, but they need to be done, right? And it's so important. And this is the reality. And I think there's so much wisdom to that for just expectation management, also focus in terms of making sure that you're doing something meaningful and sustainable and valuable. But to now change those gears and let's go back to you as the co-founder, CEO of Silvertree Brands, where just right now, what would you say that the present and the near-term future looks like for you? What are your plans if you're willing to share that? And how do you intend on maintaining your growth?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe to merge those two points you just made now into one point. There's this topic around how do you manage yourself? And I mean, everybody is different. And obviously I talk a little bit of some from my own experience as well as, seeing colleagues, etc. And, you're right about the early stage of startups being super sexy. And then you get into the grind of running a bigger organization where you got to deal with, a key person resigned. Now I have to go and do a job interview process, or I have to deal with this person who's not doing their job. Do I need to fire them? How do I performance manage them? Those sorts of things are not considered so sexy. But I think one of the important things to do is to keep reflecting on why you decided to do what you are doing. And remind yourself, and it's quite helpful to write it down. To be honest, I haven't written it down as much as I should. So this is a case of do what I say, not what I do. But basically, like at the beginning of or early on any entrepreneurial journey, is to write down what success might look like, where you would like to be in 5 or 10 years' time, and why you're doing it. So that you can look on that and actually celebrate the parts that's working well. Because if we're having this conversation like we're having now, you've become the CEO of a successful business. That's amazing, right? There are very few people who do that. If you ask the average person off the street, including yourself of 10 years ago, would you like to be the CEO of a business employing X many people, feeding that many families, offering these amazing services, and you're the boss, right? 99% of people would say that's amazing, including you of 10 years ago. And
especially
so reminding yourself of that fact. Well, exactly, right? Reminding yourself of that is I think, really important, not to gloat or to anything like that, but just to remember that you're actually where you want to be. And as you were saying about yourself personally, is that, you wouldn't want to be doing anything else. And that's not necessarily true of everything that you need to do in your day, right? There's going to be parts that you enjoy less and there's parts that you enjoy more. But at the end of the day, you've made the decision to be where you are and you're enjoying that. And I think that's helpful. But of course, if you struggle to convince yourself of that, then you need to also then think about what that means. And that maybe it's time for a transition.
Let's pause here for a moment. If you've made it this far into the episode, it's probably because we're talking about things that you're trying to implement in your business. You found your sweet spot in the market, you've gained momentum, and you've already been through a phase of growth. Because of this, you know that on the outside, growth is super sexy, but on the inside, it's incredibly difficult to achieve and to sustain. So now I've got a question for you. Now that you know the sacrifices it takes to achieve growth, how much time are you currently spending thinking about your direction and your next phase of growth? I bet not as much as you'd like, because you're still in the thick of it. leading, deciding, pushing for performance, pursuing new opportunities, maybe even thinking about selling the business. See, your story is yours. But this chapter where growth meets complexity, this is when things get hard. Because you can listen to insights from podcasts and stories from people that have been there before. But applying it to your context is a completely different ballgame. So let me help you. If you want to have a 90-minute, no strings attached conversation with me, then head over to Metavolve's website in the description of this podcast below and let me help you navigate this next phase of growth. Because at the end of the day, building a great business is complex, but it doesn't have to be complicated.